Hello everyone, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I just wanted to acknowledge, and I wanted to start with an acknowledgement of the In Context programme as a development in the changing and what had been associated with the traditional perceptions and associations of what public art was. When I was invited to speak as part of the In Context 4 programme for this, I was instantly transported to these images by Paul Seawright, which were what I always think about when I think of South Dublin. I was studying at the time in Trinity, and I remember doing tours at the Douglas Hyde Gallery, and it was the first time I was in 2000. It was the first time I had to explain what a local authority commission was and how work could be made in one place, but then sit so beautifully in another in this contemporary gallery setting. This was all part of a whole development of public art which happened around the time, and a lot of it was led by kind of curatorial approaches such as the ones that were programmed by Jenny Houghton and Aisling Pryor. The quote that I had just looked at here was the use of exhibition locations outside the museum has been motivated by the practical need for space, but also by the meaning that such places convey and contribute to the work of art, the freedom they allow for innovation and the potential they offer for public accessibility. So this Mary Jane Jacobs quote resonates with the leap from the site to the gallery and back, and Fingal too had that experience as well. We had, in my early days as just but while I was even researching public art in Ireland, Fingal had welcomed artists such as Amy Plant and Gerard Byrne to Fingal, and Mobile Stop Shop is represented here by Amy Plant, was a caravan which doubled as a shop, a soapbox, a publishing house and a recording studio, and undertook a series of visits around the town. Similarly, Gerard Byrne did an archive of photographs, and these ended up travelling on a mobile library service. So again, moving and moving all around this large county. It seemed to me that Fingal was a hard place to pin down, given its size, similar to South Dublin, and its different landscapes. It shares a lot of parallels with here in terms of history, rural edges, urban development and scale. I thought I would look at how artists visiting a landscape such as as large as this, would anchor themselves within a context, and the firmly held belief that from previous brave commissions, that works that are created for one place should really relate to the artist's practice, and that that it is Fingal's belief that work that is made in Fingal for Fingal as a commission should be very true to the artist's own practice, and would sit comfortably both in Fingal but also internationally and other contexts, which a lot of our works have done so. So I love this film still by Brian Duggan, who titled The Measure. It's a film piece. I'm beginning to feel quite different from what I was when I came here. So I think for any artist visiting a site or a place or a new local authority in this case, there is that sense of the visitor and the outsider. This project was called Oh Machine, and had included a film, a book of new fiction, and a site-specific screening at the Water Tower on the M50, which you might recognise when you're going to IKEA. The boom-bust atmosphere was very present in the commissions in Fingal from 2007 up till now. It was Brian's first introduction to Fingal was a stay at a very fancy show home estate in Hollystown, which at the time was very empty, and it was very near to the Huntstown Quarry, which became the site of his work. As a way to kind of anchor I suppose Brian's experience of this otherworldliness, he was, as an outsider, trying to find something that would make sense of the context. So he came across this book, The Machine Stops, by Ian Foster, which looked at this Edwardian view of the future, where machines were going to really damage our personal relationships. Films like The Man That Fell to Earth and The Prisoner were all part of this dislocation of place within the film that mapped, just like the Dublin Mountains journey, a 44-kilometre journey of the Fingal landscape from the quarry to the coast, and told this kind of non-linear narrative at how a stranger would navigate a new landscape. The publication then was gave an opportunity for Brian to become a commissioner himself, where he actually invited writers to come up with this theme of 3009 and develop new fiction. Brian wrote a piece, so did Francis McKee, and the writers from Fingal were all selected by John Banville, who was also a Fingal resident, lives in Howth. Similarly, this idea of trying to navigate a really very large space was looked at within Dennis McNulty's work. He had produced this wonderful film piece called Interzone. Dennis had taken many journeys to Fingal, and we spoke often about the difficulty in finding a centre to this place. So he took the multiple journeys through the post-boom landscape, documenting architectural developments, changes, and how in Fingal, as I'm sure with South Dublin, that one landscape moves very quickly to another, from an urban to a rural to a sort of a nowhere space. Dennis explored how these changes could make a kind of a person feel, and developed this narrative which very much locates the project in the present, but has a nod to a past just through the other elements which he used between phones and sound. But like all great paintings and artworks, it's very much of a time where Fingal is documented through a jib camera, through all these changing landscapes, and it's a project that has been shown again, and also we will probably revisit it at some point again to see how the changes to the landscape might look like now, how Fingal has changed in another couple of years. So that was very interesting, and sort of a way that artists have looked at the landscape and how to navigate a really large space. From a historical point of view, with this project called Tattered Outlaws of History, this was a new collaboration that was emerged between a photographer, filmmaker and a contemporary dancer, Fergus O'Connor and Dan Dubovitz, who anchored themselves to an existing historical feature, of which there are many in South Dublin, the 12 Towers of Fingal, 12 Martello Towers, and began to tell their stories through documenting, through contemporary dance, through interview. All towers were in mixed use, and this became a 12-screen installation of all the towers in a derelict Martello Tower in Skerries. That tower has since it sort of enacted a whole group of volunteers around this project in Skerries, and the project now, the tower will now be opened as a heritage site in the next couple of years, based on that kind of tower support group that developed through Tattered Outlaws of History, and this project kind of has cemented itself in the history of the towers as well. Another project which was quite interesting was looking on a smaller scale. So Christine Mackey took one field in Donabate, and made multiple visits and revisits with the local school there to create this Victorian workbook, which allowed you to go out into any patch of land and sort of monitor the changes in the ecology and the environment. It allowed allowed the students to go out with ecologists and botanists on these field trips to manipulate the landscape through making bird screens and adding things to the landscape to see what changes would happen. And this book then was easily transferable to any patch of green space, which was also then, the project was taken from Donabate, which would have been more the rural area, over to Dublin 15 the year after, where two kind of schools in the more urban environment had the same exploration as part of an exhibition in Driecht. So it was very interesting that these pieces could be used in that way. Currently, in terms of programme, there's a lot of public art projects that Fingal have done over the last 10 years. But currently what I'm working on is a residency programme called Resort Residency, and it's a project which takes place in a mobile home park in Portrane, with the help of a local business called Linder's Mobile Home Park. So Resort Residency and Resort Revelations is, I suppose it's a way where artists had made all these journeys during the sort of 10 years trying to find a centre point of Fingal. It was an opportunity to have artists reside for a bit longer in the county, but yet the residency is set up but it relates to kind of the way the artists have navigated the whole of Fingal, in that they've been invited to a place for a period sent off to incubate an idea and then returns. The return, I feel, has been very important in this project, whereas a residency has a sort of an introductory period and then a space between it, and then an artist can come back and kind of, I suppose, think about where they had been. And I think the works have really reflected that time. And the projects, although kind of a small residency and a much smaller budget than the other ones, they've been quite ambitious in scale and ambitious in thinking, and been very transformative, I think, for the area and possibly for the artists that were engaged in them. So this is a piece by Gareth Kennedy, which was an amazing straw bale tower structure which was created as part of the residency in a field locally in Portrane. And it looked at the harvest traditions and the local traditions of the North Dublin mummers, which was a kind of a folk tradition which operated within the rural farming communities, which allowed people to kind of subvert their everyday reality. So this was, again, one of these spaces that was a space in itself, but it was enacted with a series of events and workshops to think about this time of year, to think about this place, and to kind of engage with a structure as well. Another two artists created a site-specific meal. So they did a meal and it was a performance. So they took histories and sort of wove them in to an actual performance and a lunch. So that's another way to kind of look at the landscape. We had Alan James Burns, who identified a cave in Tower Bay and devised this amazing sound installation at low tide, which looked at the fine line between art and madness in the context of Portrane being so near St. Ita's hospital. So there was a very interesting experience which happened with this project. And again, a lot of the projects that happen they need the time, but they also need some trust and some risk. And that's really important in public art for Fingal. This was a radio play which we had devised with Michael McLaughlin, and just like the newspaper which you mentioned, Emmett, radio and local newspapers provide that endless kind of vehicle for presenting public art, and it's especially on a local level. We were working with St. Ita's Radio here to produce this radio play where Michael McLaughlin and Mike Finn, a playwright, took a narrative, took a history, 100-year fiction of the area, and worked with a local drama group to create this radio play which was broadcast live from St. Ita's during the Resort Revelations this year, and we invited people to come and listen to it in their cars at 6 o'clock looking out at Lambay Island. So it was a lovely way to kind of have something happening live and to look at this space of radio and sight. So before I just pass you over, I suppose it's interesting when you think about the first projects that were kind of very significant to Fingal, with the multi-stop shop and the piece that went on a mobile library. We had our 1916 commission this year. It was 1916 commissions everywhere had a real weight of responsibility on both the commissioner and the artist who were engaging them, because they had to represent so many different histories and so many things. Fingal wanted a commission that looked at the Fingal's part in 1916, and one of the big things was the movement of messages, but also of the role of the women in this as well. So this was one of the themes that were coming up when we were developing a commission brief for this, which was very much a standard two-stage commission brief where artists were invited with an initial idea and then asked to resubmit something more developed. It was a huge task for the artists. The committee wanted projects that would, I suppose, take in the whole county, involve multiple groups, and look at a kind of a future for Fingal. So it was a lot to take in, and then Mobile Monuments was born and presented to us. It was so it just sort of occurred to me that a way for an artist to kind of anchor themselves in an area is to maybe keep moving, and this project moved throughout the county and touched a number of people and places. That line where they say there's nothing more invisible than a monument, there was nothing more visible than mobile monuments in Fingal. So with that, I'm going to pass you over to Rona, who's going to speak a little bit more about this. Thank you.